Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another installment in our reviewed and ranked series. We've been doing this for several months at this point, and we have arrived at the end of the base roster. Now, if you're enjoying this series, don't worry, because it's not going away just yet, as we still have the unlockable and DLC characters to go over, but there's still quite a bit to discuss with this character that we'll be highlighting today, and that is, of course, Wolverine. And Wolverine is an excellent character within this game. All things considered, we'll talk a lot more about what he brings to the table and where I feel that he ends up within the distribution of the character tier list. So if you're enjoying this series, make sure that you leave a like on today's video, especially if you find it helpful and or interesting. And don't forget to subscribe for that daily variety content. Let's talk about Wolverine. Wolverine is, again, an absolutely phenomenal character, and right off the bat, he comes out of the gate swinging with 10 different team build synergies, and that is the new record to beat in terms of team build synergies. Though they are only across 3 different categories, they are certainly nothing to scoff at. He has 2 synergies in the defense category, one with New Avengers and the other with Heavy Metal. He has 2 vitality synergies with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and X-Force, and he has 6 strength synergies with X-Men, Anti-Heroes, Martial Artists, Cutting Edge, All New X-Men, and Fantastic Four Reserve Member. So in case you haven't picked up on it as of yet, if you are looking to bolster your team's damage output based off of team synergy alone, Wolverine is your guy. He is a must-have on your team if you are looking to raise the base strength of your overall team, as without trying, you can get a 5 or 6% increase, and if you really wanted to, you could probably push it much higher than that by strategically picking members of your team. And especially where I mainly play this game from an educational and speedrunning standpoint, it's important to note that this is one of the best characters that you can use for fleshing out the effectiveness of your team outside of additional enhancements that can be made. So, certainly a heavy hitter in the team synergies alone. Moving along to the base abilities in Wolverine's kit, we of course have the standard hit combo. This is executed in a series of 5 hits across 4 different button presses. The 3rd hit will activate hits 3 and 4 of that combo, and the nice thing about Wolverine's attacks here is because they all make physical contact with his opponents, they will buffer them away from retaliating immediately, especially if they are the smaller grunt type enemies. And that is certainly a trait that I have placed a lot of value on, because it helps increase the overall survivability of the character, whether or not you're playing them directly or if you have the AI controlling that team member. Wolverine's heavy attack isn't great, but it does have a decent amount of forward reach to it, as he will lash out with both fists, claws extended, out in front of him with those 2 marking slashes. I don't find myself using Wolverine's heavy attack a whole lot, but it does have its utilizations and helps the character cover a bit more forward-reaching ground. But again, there's a lot of other things that are a lot better for Wolverine in particular. Wolverine has a mid-air somersault on his mid-air jump, and that does quite well for him, as it's always a nice trait to have when trying to get around a lot of those floor hazards, laser puzzles, and other items. So it's quite nice to see that he has some versatility to him as well. Wolverine has a falling aerial that is eerily reminiscent of the first character that we ever looked at, that being Black Panther. The big distinguishing factor between these two is Black Panther will occasionally get hung up on executing his falling aerial, either if you don't press the button down for long enough, or if you are falling on top of an opponent, he will kind of get staggered out of it and won't be able to fully execute that falling aerial. And Wolverine does not have that issue, as he will fall slicing all the way down. And he even has an ability that he can chain the falling aerial out of, which always really helps characters in terms of expanding their DPS and recuperating a lot of the energy points that you use in large fights. So hats off to that capacity with Wolverine's character as well. And as we do need to take a brief moment and note, Wolverine does have that blocking animation that's fairly consistent across the cast. He will brace his arms in a cross out in front of him to resist incoming attacks from oncoming blows, and instead of a typical somersault forward, he will make a dash in the direction that you input. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this about Deadpool when we initially went through him, but it is important to note for him as well as Wolverine that both characters do have a passive ability, being their healing factor, meaning that without any advancements to the Alliance Enhancement tree, these characters will passively regenerate their health as they are going through the standard story. That is both in and out of combat, so that's a nice little perk. It's not overpowered, but it certainly does help early game players that might be struggling a little bit more with some of the more technical boss fights, in terms of allowing you to get through them a little more easily, especially when you don't have easy access to healing type abilities, either through that Alliance Advancement section or through healing orbs, pickups, and other items that are dropped by your opponents. Let's now pivot and talk a little bit more about the abilities that Wolverine possesses. The first ability is the Claw Strike, which is fairly useful in certain circumstances. It has one of the better damage ratings out of Wolverine's attacks, and this is just a series of slashes that take place with both claws out in front of the character, and there is one larger strong cross slash at the end of the attack after it is used, or once you stop mashing the button to repeatedly use this attack. It does come in with a nice classification of A to the damage rating, meaning that it's decent against a lot of the grunt type enemies, especially if they collect up in a group directly in front of you. It has a conservative C rating to the energy points consumed and a D classification to the stagger gauge. There are other better uses of abilities for Wolverine when it comes to dealing stagger damage, but if in a pinch you really could use it if you absolutely had to. The attack has a piercing attack type and a barrage synergy trait, and with almost all of Wolverine's abilities, he has the benefit of a reduced energy point cost, increased attack damage, increased damage to the stagger gauge, and a reduced chance of the attack being interrupted upon ranking up this ability. And the outlier, we will touch on that once we get to it here in a few minutes. Wolverine's second ability is the Adamantium Assault, and this involves a jumping, spinning uppercut that pulls enemies in to slice at them. And this is another decent damage dealer in terms of what he puts out. He has an A classification to the damage and a C classification to the energy point cost and to the stagger gauge, and this is the ability that I mentioned a few moments ago that you can chain the falling aerial out of to further expand on your DPS and energy point recovery, especially in rift type challenges where your abilities and synergies deal increased damage and you have decreased damage on your other attacks but have an increased recuperation in your energy points when attacking into your opponents with anything other than your ability and synergy type attacks. So a very strong character for those types of challenge, no doubt. This ability also has the piercing attack type, and it has the launch synergy trait, and is the one that I find myself using most frequently, again because of the nice damage that it outputs, as well as having the benefit of having that damage extension off of the falling aerial after the attack has been carried out. Wolverine's third ability, it looks deceiving by the book. I mean, it doesn't have a lot of really good indicators, but it is a very good ability for Wolverine in particular, because despite the fact that it does little to no damage on the use of the actual ability, it offers an increase to the attack damage for Wolverine's character over a short period of time, which can be extended by ranking up the ability. The initial activation is right in the immediate vicinity of Wolverine, and then he benefits from a 15-second buff to his attack damage, which is quite nice, especially once you have that ability fully ranked up. By the numbers, it has an E classification to damage and energy points consumed, and an abysmal F classification to the stagger damage that is dealt. But if you use this to set up into any other ability or synergy type attack, then it is very much worth the investment of the energy points going into that, especially once you have the decreased penalty to the energy points by using this ability after it has been rigged up. And as this ability is increased, it has a reduced energy point cost, an increase to the effectiveness, an increase to the duration, and that reduced chance of the attack being interrupted. Wolverine's final ability is the Berserker Barrage, and this is a dash type attack that really helps Wolverine close the distance between some of your opponents, and is the best option in Wolverine's kit for dealing damage to the stagger gauge specifically, while at the same time maintaining a decent classification to other damage that it deals. It has a B classification to the damage dealt, a C classification to the energy points consumed, and that A classification to stagger damage, and it can be aimed while it is being charged, or if it's used in a synergy type environment, Wolverine will just lunge straight forward in the direction that he is facing at that point in time that the synergy is activated. This attack has the piercing attack type and the charge synergy trait, and it's pretty consistent in its performance with other charge type abilities that we have seen from other members of the cast up to this point. Now, Wolverine's extreme ability is one of the more interesting ones in the cast, as it can either be really good or really bad depending on how you use it. And that all comes down to the fact that it is an influenceable extreme attack. Most of the attacks within the roster either have to be facing a certain way, or you have to be aware of the general area that the attack will take place in. However, Wolverine walks in any direction that you're holding that joystick as he hacks and slashes out in front of him with a rather extended hitbox area compared to any of the other abilities in his kit. He can get stuck and hung up on obstacles throughout the battlefield or on bosses and mighty type enemies. However, that can play off to be in your advantage, especially if the opponent is stationary, such as the case with opponents like Sandman and Surtur. So if you make sure that you are angled in a direction where you are not going to be mobile, he can do a lot of damage against those boss type characters. If not, it's still a pretty decent option for mowing down and slicing through the opponents that you'll be facing off against. You'll just want to be cautious about where you are influencing, and I find it better if you have an idea of how you want the attack to be detonated and where you want Wolverine to go to take control of the character, rather than let the AI take care of that all on its own. But he does decently well, even if he's left to his own devices. Just be aware that there may be times where it's a little less reliable than others if you are not the one in direct control of what he is doing. All things considered, it is still a pretty good extreme attack, and it has a decently short duration to it, meaning that you can get through a lot of the stagger animations and full stuns that you would get off on your opponents in the 3.5 second time frame that it takes for the attack to fully conclude before Wolverine becomes actionable again. I would still recommend activating the Primal Rage before using this ability, because that will additionally bolster the damage that this extreme attack is capable of outputting. So now that we have looked at everything that Wolverine has to offer, it's time for us to determine where he belongs on this character tier list. And I mentioned it right off the top of the video, there's a lot of really good things that Wolverine has to offer. He has incredible abilities that offer a lot of damage output. He has a more reliable method of retaining and restoring his energy points after using ability and synergy type attacks, as well as personal damage amplification. Just a lot of really good things coming out of Wolverine. So that already puts him above the lower tiers of our tier list, and even far ahead of the mid ground of this roster. So I do think that Wolverine, with everything that he brings to the table, has a very clear-cut case for making his way into the S tier of characters. However, I don't feel like he deserves the top spot at this point in time, as Hulk is just a lot more practical and has very specific utilities that just melt through boss-type characters. And Psylocke, I think, still has a slight edge over Wolverine due to the fact that all of her abilities are very, very prevalent and help extend her range pretty significantly, and her extreme attack certainly has the edge over Wolverine. Despite the fact that it's not as controllable, it takes up a massive amount of space and is a very efficient damage dealer. So I will feel comfortable placing Wolverine ahead of Black Panther, and despite the fact that I did mention a minor flaw in Black Panther's kit, I feel like that does not disqualify him from his high ranking here at currently the bottom of the S tier characters. But what do you think? Do you think there's anything that I overlooked with Wolverine? Do you think that there's anything else that needs to be mentioned, or other opinions that you have of him? Did I oversell him too much? Be sure to let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. Don't forget to subscribe for that daily variety content. And if you've made it this far into the video, make sure that you leave a like. Thanks again for watching, and I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day.